Hello and welcome to Supercommunicators. So human beings are, and they're inherently social creatures. Our brains are they crave making connections and it kind of means that the need for social connection and an interaction is a fundamental part of our nature. But here's the problem. Not everyone communicates in the same way at the same time. So hopefully over the next 30 to 45 minutes here, I can impart some conversation skills that you can practice to become a super communicator inside and out of the workplace. So this course is based upon that. Supercommunicators is a book by Charles Duhigg. He's a New York Times best-selling author. And this is a quick and it's a fast read. I do highly recommend this book as well as many of his other books. He approaches some fairly complex topics with ease and provides some practical solutions by offering loads of real life and scientific examples. So this book being jam-packed with so many goodies and insights that, I'm going to give you a little heads up here. We're currently in the process of developing a larger classroom session, but I did want to take some of the tips and tricks, and put them in a quick little webinar for you, as it does provide useful skills for connecting that you can really start practicing today. If this topic interests you, please keep your eyes peeled for the classroom course. It will offer a more in-depth and hands-on experience to really enhance those connection skills. Some of us think that we are good communicators, and yet we still feel like we're having poor conversations. So while we actually may be good at communicating, we might be doing a poor job of making that true connection. And so our brains can also be self-sabotaging, and they tend to dwell on those negative interactions. So according to Duhigg, it's a lot easier to remember those few bad conversations than all of the good ones. You might be asking now, well, how can we further develop our communication skills to help ensure that every conversation is a positive connection? Well, that's why we're here today, isn't it? So let's go ahead and dive into our objectives today. And again, this is a huge topic for discussion. So for the sake of time today, we will be focusing on differentiating between the three essential conversations that we could be having at any given moment. So Duhigg states that actually every single conversation or interaction that we have with another person is a learning conversation made up of 1 to 3 types of communication. We have our practical conversations, and that's kind of asking, what's the point of this? What are we really getting about here? We have our emotional conversations, which asks, how do we feel about a given situation or another person, perhaps? And then we have our social conversations, and that really kind of digs into who are we and who we are in relationship to other people. Now, I wouldn't feel right leaving you all without some skills to practice for your improvement. So our final surprise objective here is some amazing conversation tools that you can start practicing today to begin to be making those meaningful connections with the people around you. So miscommunication happens when people are having different types of conversations. If you're speaking emotionally while I'm talking practically, we are in essence using different cognitive languages. So if you just want to vent about a situation while I'm trying to solve it, we'll never make that connection, and ultimately the conversation will end with frustration. And I know that we've all had these kinds of experiences before where you might be talking apples and your conversation partner is talking oranges, and that conversation really doesn't go anywhere, right? So it's really up to those participating to figure out what kind of communication is happening and then sync up with their conversation partner for maximum understanding and connection. The great communicators really learn to adapt their tone, their responses, and their questions to the person and to the type of conversations that they're having. And these types, they often overlap, and in one conversation, it might shift from one type to another, depending on the context and the people involved in that conversation. So my question, how do we as super communicators differentiate between these 3 types during our conversations. So we'll kick it off with our practical conversations. And practical conversations, they really require participants to ask, what is this conversation really about? Practical conversations is really, an exchange of ideas or information focused on achieving a specific purpose or resolving a particular issue. It often involves clear communication, problem solving, or decision making with an emphasis on that actionable result. Examples of practical conversations might be, if your conversation partner is weighing the costs or benefits of a decision. If so, it might be more helpful to respond with data and reasoning. Or maybe your conversation partner wants to talk about their beliefs or their values. If that's the case, then usually it's better to respond with more empathy and to share stories similar to that situation. So now that we kind of have a grasp of what practical conversations are and how to spot them in conversation, let's go ahead and move on to the emotional ones. So in these types of conversations, it's important to pay attention to others' mood and energy for these conversation cues. Emotions really do shape every conversation, and when we bring those feelings and vulnerabilities to the surface, share them, and then ask for others to share with us, that's really where we can begin to see how we can align with one another and really kind of make that true connection, right? In an emotional conversation, it's a dialogue where feelings, emotions, or personal experiences really take that center stage. They steal that spotlight. These conversations often focus on expressing, understanding, or managing those difficult emotions, and they aim to build deeper connections, resolve conflicts, or even provide some support. Emotional conversations are less about solving the problems and more about that empathy, that validation and connection. So emotional conversations, they really have, it's a wide range of examples. Supporting someone through a tough time or helping them deal with a loss, expressing appreciation, affection, or even discussing a life decision. It can even be apologizing for a mistake or confronting someone about something that they did. So now that we understand both our practical and emotional conversations, it's time to learn about that third type, the social ones. We all contain multitudes of identities that emerge from a blend of influences that really shape our thoughts and behaviors, right? So we wear, many identity hats, so to speak. And I don't just mean our job identities. Our individual experiences shape the many hats that we wear throughout our life. As an example, to name a few of my hats, I'm a female, I'm a visual designer, a dog mom, I ride horses every week. I could really go on and on. But all of these social identities, they really shape how we speak and how we hear. It's the most important thing in social conversations to really not trap your communication partner into a one-dimensional identity. Everybody has many different multitudes to them and many different hats. Not one person is just one thing. So don't go into a conversation, especially a social one, boxing your conversation partner into that. Look, a social conversation, it leans more on that casual and informal dialogue that focuses on building rapport, strengthening relationships, or even just simply enjoying the company. Unlike those practical or emotional conversations, social conversations are not necessarily goal-oriented. They revolve around topics of mutual interest, shared experiences, or even a lighthearted exchange. And they're often used to maintain relationships or to break the ice on a new relationship. Social similarities between people, they already exist. We share many hats between each other. We search for them naturally when we meet someone new, and we look for common ground. It's really vital in social conversations to take those connections a step further and make those commonalities more solid by asking meaningful questions and then in return, listening genuinely. Now, some forms of social conversations that can include small talk or talking about hobbies, sharing weekend plans or upcoming travel plans. And social conversations, they can be as simple as even just complimenting someone. So now that we understand those three essential conversations that we have with one another at any given moment during any conversation, it's really now going to be up to us as super communicators to figure out which conversation we are having and form that meaningful, positive connections. Easy, right? Well, don't you worry. I'm going to wrap up today's session with some tips and tricks to help you. I really want to set you up as best as possible in the short amount of time we have today to leave here interested to make every future connection a meaningful one. Communication is, in fact, a learned skill and it requires practice, daily practice. It can be boiled down to just a few simple concepts. We can learn to prepare for the conversation, learn to set those boundaries of what is okay to discuss and what is completely off the table. We have active listening techniques that can be practiced as well. And through those, you can learn to respond with genuine reactions. And observing your conversation partner's tone of voice, gestures, expressions can really go a long way into deciphering what kind of conversation you're actually having. So we will be going into more depth on these in that full classroom course. So please keep your eyes out for that. So before we go any further, I do want to bring up a technique called emotional intelligence. And I want to start by showing you this clip from The Big Bang Theory. So Duhigg references this show quite a bit in his book as he discusses this term of emotional intelligence and how it really applies into making connections with people. So we'll go ahead. It's just a short clip here. You might need to turn up your volume a little bit on your computer, but we'll come back in just a moment.
I often misinterpret how others are feeling. Like, I can't always tell if someone is only joking or laughing at me. If they're mad at something I've done or just in a bad mood. It's incredibly stressful.
Really? You always seem so confident.
Well, I'm not. And if I could read people's minds, life would be so much simpler.
Well, now I wish I had the ability to make that stuff easier for you.
Well, thank you.
Cute little clip there between Sheldon and Penny. I like having a visual aspect instead of just a verbal or a reading one that I really hope kind of shows, the quickness that moving from one type of conversation to another in one general setting can happen. While we all aren't like physicists like Sheldon, we can acquire that power of emotional intelligence to really kind of better connect with those around us like Penny does. And it can really help to differentiate what conversation you are having. And here's a different way of looking at these types of conversation that might be helpful in kind of hammering home these types. So Duhigg, I think, explained it simply and best. He gave an example on how some schools have actually trained teachers to ask students questions designed to reveal their true goals, because it really helps everyone communicate what they want and what they need in a conversation. So when a student comes up to a teacher, upset for instance, the teacher might ask, "Do you want help, hugged, or heard?" I know it seems silly, but some of these silly things can really help you remember, especially during tough conversations. So help, hugged, or heard. And different human connection needs, they require different types of communication. Those different kinds of interaction, helping, hugging, or hearing, they correspond to those three different kinds of conversation that can occur to express those needs: practical, emotional, and social. If you have a trusted conversation partner already, try asking them outright what kind of conversation they're looking to have. So as we learn to increase that emotional intelligence, we build that rapport and we build that trust, the faster you will become at making the distinction in the moments and responding appropriately. Looping for understanding, it's a common communication technique where a listener paraphrases, or summarizes what the speaker has said to confirm their understanding. And this process really ensures clarity, it reduces misunderstandings, and demonstrates that active listening. It's particularly useful in emotional and practical conversations, or those complex conversations where having that understanding and alignment is really crucial. So how looping for understanding works. You must start by listening actively, paying attention to what the speaker is saying and focusing on both the content and their emotions. Then paraphrase, taking what you heard and repeating it or rephrasing it in your own words, what you understood. And then ask your conversation partner, seek that confirmation. Ask them to confirm whether your interpretation of their words was correct. And if necessary, then adjust your understanding based on the speaker's clarification. And then finally, responding. So once that understanding is established, respond or move forward in the conversation by asking meaningful questions. It offers clarity. It ensures that both parties of the communication, they're on the same page. And it offers that validation. It makes the speaker feel heard and understood. It can also help with conflict resolution, which I know some of you had mentioned was the most difficult part of your conversation. So try some looping for understanding. It really helps to reduce the misunderstandings in especially those tense or emotional situations. And it can help to build deeper connection by building trust and rapport by showing that genuine interest in making a connection. So a final little tidbit I'll leave you guys with today, and I think it's one of the best ones, is matching. So matching in conversation, it's a technique where one person, they subtly aligns their behavior, their tone, language, or even their body language with their other person to help build that rapport and kind of create a sense of connection and foster that mutual understanding. Matching, often it happens naturally or even subconsciously in comfortable interactions, but it can also be consciously thought about throughout difficult situations. So types of matching in conversation. There are 4 different main ones that I want to focus on here. There's verbal matching, so adapting a similar vocabulary, paraphrasing, or even their conversational style. So for example, if someone comes up to you and says, I'm totally pumped about this, you don't want to respond with, yeah, that's cool. You want to go like, whoa, that's awesome. I'm totally excited too. You can match in tone, in their pace. So kind of matching the other person's speech, their volume, or even their tempo can help build rapport and build a sense of familiarity and trust. So for example, if you're having a conversation with someone and they kind of drop their volume, or they speak slowly or softly, adjust your speech similar. This will help make them feel more comfortable and hopefully build a deeper connection. There's body language matching as well, so reflecting physical gestures, posture, or expressions. This can really encourage comfort and help the other person feel understood and valued. And finally, there's some emotional matching here. So really kind of aligning with the person's emotional state or energy level. This will help facilitate, cooperation and it'll aid to strengthen relationships, especially in those personal connections. So if someone, is sharing exciting news, you want to match their enthusiasm with an upbeat response or an upbeat question that shows genuine interest. Now, I will say that there are times in conversation when not to match. So if the other person is in a negative or destructive emotional state, matching that tone or emotional state, it will probably escalate the situation or make it worse. If it's a supervisor talking to an employee, for instance, it's a conversation that calls for clear leadership or guidance, excessive matching might dilute your authority or clarity. And I'm going to leave you today with this quote from the author himself. The right conversation at the right moment can change everything. And learning how to differentiate between those three essential conversations will really help make those genuine connections. And it's the first step into becoming a super communicator. I hope that you found this information useful and realize that it is possible with a little practice and a little effort that we can all become super communicators and make some genuine connections.